Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us here at the U.S. Center. As Ashley mentioned, my name is Rob Diamond. I'm a special assistant to the President at the White House and the Director of Private Sector Engagement. It's been my privilege the last few months to work with many of our leading companies, both here on stage and in our audience today, in the launch of the American Business Act on Climate Pledge. I think, as many of you know, before we arrived here in Paris, more than 180 countries representing nearly 90% of global emissions have put forward their own climate targets. That was real progress in the buildup to these Paris talks, and for our part, the U.S. is on track to reach the emissions target that the President set 6 years ago in Copenhagen, reducing our carbon emissions in the range of 17%. And that's why the President set a new target on the front end of the Paris negotiations, where America will be reducing our emissions 26 to 28% below our 2005 levels. So our task in Paris is pretty clear. It's to turn these achievements into an enduring framework for progress. We're looking to secure an agreement that builds in ambition, that agrees to a strong system of transparency, that reaffirms our commitment that resources will be there for countries willing to do their part, and to make sure that these resources flow to countries that need help in preparing for the impacts of climate change. And finally, we are here in Paris to show that businesses and investors that the global economy is on a path towards a firm path to a low-carbon future. And that's why we designed a truly whole-of-nation approach in the run-up to Paris, arguably most importantly demonstrating how serious the private sector and U.S. businesses are taking action around climate change. In July, we launched the American Business Act on Climate Pledge. To date, 154 companies who have operations in all 50 states, employ nearly 11 million people, represent more than $4.2 trillion in annual revenue, and have a combined market cap of over $7 trillion have joined this effort. And by signing the American Business Act on Climate Pledge, these companies are doing two things. One, they're voicing a strong support for Paris outcome, not just on paper, but in their presence here over the next 2 weeks. These pledges recognize that the countries gathered here have put forward strong climate targets and are voicing a strong support for the outcome in these negotiations. Secondly, and most importantly, they're demonstrating their ongoing commitment to climate action. This was not just simply putting their name on a document. This was them holding up a set of serious commitments, demonstrating action they're taking on an individualized company basis to move the needle, to make the business case why these actions are necessary and how they're going to contribute to the broader effort and success here in Paris. So as the world looks towards us here in Paris, the President is committed to building this momentum and bringing home a successful deal with American leadership at all levels, not just our federal government, with our state and local partners, but with these great American companies who are leading the way. With that, I'll turn it back over to Ashley and look forward to this impressive panel today. And thank you again all for your work to date and for being here with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Rob. Now, before I introduce our moderator, I just want to introduce you to our panelists up here on stage. On the left, I am pleased to introduce Kevin Mcknight, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of Alcoa. Next, we have Leah Seligman, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of NRG. Next, we have Thad Miller, who is the Executive Vice President of Calpine. To his left is John Woolard, who is the Vice President of Energy for Google. And finally, we have Alex Liftman, who is the Global Environment Executive for Bank of America. So thank you very much for joining us for this event. To moderate the event and to kick us off, I'm pleased to invite Bob Perciasepe, who is the President of the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, C2ES. Bob.
It was set for Rob there. All right. Does everybody hear me all right? Great. Well, thanks, Rob, for all that. And Ashley, thank you for the introduction. For those of you who don't know about the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, we're an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, and we spend time bringing diverse interests together, including the business community, to work on and get galvanized around common sense solutions to climate and energy problems. We have a 30-member Business Environmental Leadership Council. Some of the members here, some of the folks here are on that council. I also want to point out a few people in the audience, Melissa Lavinson from Pacific Gas and Electric, and also Steve Harper from Intel are also part of our business council. all the companies here today have signed the American Businesses Act on Climate Pledge that Rob mentioned when he was up here before. And a lot of companies signed onto this pledge, and it's a pretty important indicator of the growing support that American businesses have to make progress on climate change, and that they are doing things in their own companies to make a difference. Earlier this fall, we organized a statement by 14 companies with over $1 trillion in revenues in support of a climate agreement. We've heard about the White House pledge. You see an ad up here, Business Back, Low Carbon USA. That ad was in the Wall Street Journal, and C2ES, along with other nonprofits, helped organize that with American businesses. You know, businesses are focusing on this and are taking action because they understand that there are risks in climate impacts, but there are also opportunities in a clean energy economy. They already know that the planet is warming. They already know that they're being impacted by these changes, and whether it's in their own facilities, or whether it's in their operations, or whether it's in their supply or distribution chains, these impacts are being felt. And so we're seeing a burst of entrepreneurial activity focused on solutions, and this is what's really important. And we are expecting that a Paris Agreement will provide an additional clear signal to the world's economy that changes are needed, and that entrepreneurial energy in that space is going to be productive and helpful. So I'm going to facilitate some further comments from the panel here. I'm very excited to be with you guys. I'm looking forward to the discussion. And Kevin Mcknight, I'm going to start with you at Alcoa. You were one of the first of the 13 companies to sign on to the pledge that Rob mentioned earlier. And also from our perspective at C2ES, you've been involved with us since almost the beginning of our organization, as well as involved with the efforts to get a cap and trade program enacted in the United States earlier. So what prompted you to take these early actions, and what do you see as next after that? Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Bob. I always look up to Bob, but this is particularly difficult because I really look up to him here. Listen, Alcoa is really excited about this, and we're really proud to stand with the administration on this issue. I think most of you probably know Alcoa is an energy-intensive, trade-exposed business. I mean, GHG, greenhouse gas, is a really big deal for us. And we've been working on greenhouse gas emission reduction for more than 20 years. This is our biggest issue as a company. And we saw this as a fantastic opportunity to get on board early and to really demonstrate our strong commitment. And you know, I really believe that industry is the engine that's going to drive this. It's wonderful to see all the governments together. The buzz in this place is incredible. But at the end of the day, industry is going to drive this initiative. It has to. And we wanted to be early, and we wanted to be really strong and demonstrate clearly that we were ready to do whatever it takes to make this work.
That's great, and I appreciate that answer. Now, we also have two power companies on the panel here today. Leah from Calpine and Thad from, I'm sorry, I'm backwards here. Leah from NRG and Thad from Calpine. I'll get this straight. You know, my Rolodex is working on, I forget what time zone. So, but the question to you guys is, in many respects in the United States right now, you're on the front line with the Clean Power Plan that is being implemented. And that gives you sort of a focus to some extent, not only on yourselves, but also how you work with your customers and the states where your customers are located. And so given that energy that you already have, no pun intended, that to make some changes in your carbon footprint, what led you to the pledge, and how do you see your future laying out on that? And Lee, why don't we start with you, and then Thad, you.
Well, hello. Thank you all for having me today. I think that the pledge is actually an incredible opportunity for companies. NRG created our long-term goals a year ago, actually, but it was us in an island, and the American Act on Business pledges allowed us to all come together and work together towards a low-carbon economy for the entire country. And so that's the critical aspect, that it's not just one company standing up, it's 150 companies with massive footprints coming together to say, we can do this, we've got it, let's move. I'd say the other piece of it is, with the Clean Power Plan, is yes, when you look at our business, and I'll let my colleague from Calpine say what his business looks like, but if you look at my business, I have a lot of emissions in my house. And so while all of the other companies, everyone else's business runs on the product that we produce, I have a way that I can help every single person that we partner with to reduce their emissions as well. So there's a huge opportunity as well as an obligation for us to move as quickly as we can to a low-carbon economy.
Bob, if you give me a little latitude, something that Kevin said sparked a thought, and that is that if we think about this is really the intersection of public policy and markets. And the public policy goal is obviously to reduce carbon emissions. So the question is, how do you get industry to respond to that? And through the Clean Power Plan, and there are predecessor pollution type regulations that have been enacted in the US that use this methodology, but basically the public policy formulators have identified an externality. And they've said, here's the externality, here's a framework for pricing that externality. You in industry go out and figure out the most efficient way to deploy the capital to address that externality. And that's exactly the framework that's being used in the Clean Power Plan. As for Calpine's role in this, what I would say is that we actually have been at this for 20 years. Calpine is the largest generator by hours, megawatt hours produced in the country. We are 95% natural gas. The other 5% is renewable geothermal. And the reason I say we've been at this for 20 years is because before carbon was even on the horizon for all of us as a very important discussion topic, other pollutants were there. And natural gas generation compared to coal generation or oil generation offers a far cleaner solution for the environment, for the customers, from whatever perspective you want to look at it. And so we embarked investing literally billions of dollars in building combined cycle and peaker natural gas plants to address this problem. 60% less carbon emissions than an unscrubbed or an environmentally upgraded coal plant. The EPA and the administration have recognized the key role that natural gas plays moving the country forward towards its targets in 2030 that Rob alluded to earlier. Natural gas is one of the linchpins of the Clean Power Plan, where the capacity factor of natural gas prior to the enactment of the Clean Power Plan was about 40 to 45%. The Clean Power Plan contemplates that the use of natural gas will be ramped up to about 75%. And indeed, in the intervening period of time, it's already been ramped up to about 55% for the fleet, not just our fleet, the fleet across America. So why is this good? It seems counterintuitive, perhaps to some, that we're consuming more fossil fuels, as some in this hall may say. The fact is it's allowing us to displace the older, dirtier, unscrubbed, unenvironmentally upgraded coal. So the coal usage is coming down, the cleaner, more responsible natural gas-fired generation is increasing. And Calpine, because it's invested in all these years in the natural gas fleet, is prepared to continue to assist the nation in reducing its carbon emissions over time.
Thanks both of you for that. I mean, you guys really are now starting to push, and it's really fun to watch, actually, to be honest with you. As a policy wonk and somebody who's worked on some of these programs, this one has a lot of moving parts and a lot of flexibility and a lot of opportunity for innovation, so we appreciate what you guys are bringing to it. The other thing I'll say just quickly before I go to John is that you brought in the concept of co-benefits, which is a pretty important one. As we try to solve the climate problem, we're also going to be doing other things that will protect public health across the globe. So it's a really important
And Bob, maybe if I
concept.
could just follow up on that co-benefits point, one thing I did forget to mention is it's not only the reduction of emissions that comes from the switching from coal to gas. If we think about renewables, a very big topic in this arena, solar and wind. The wind only blows at night in most places. The sun shines during the day. So that means you need to have, at least for the foreseeable future, until there's some technological breakthrough of scale, you need to have quick responding plants. Coal plants, nuclear plants are not quick responding. Gas plants are quick responding. So that means as the sun comes up, the gas plants can back off. As the sun goes down in the afternoon before the wind comes up, let's say in California, for example, these plants can ramp up. So they're providing a very important service for the integration of renewables, which is another linchpin of the Clean Power Plan and everyone else's objectives.
Well, thanks for that, and that's a great segue into somebody who is very much involved with renewables. So John Woolard, who was introduced, is from Google, and when all of us think of the word Google, we sort of think of the people who provide us the ability to find whatever we need on the Internet of Things, which is just about everything these days. And John, we're really pleased you were able to join us today. But one of the things that most people don't understand or don't have an appreciation for is the amount of energy you guys use to do that for the world, and how hard you're working at reducing that footprint of energy demand and be as efficient as possible. And on top of that, you're probably one of the leading investors in the world for renewable energy. So obviously, Google is making a big statement with that. And so you guys signed the pledge that Rob talked about. How do you see the work that you're doing playing into that larger theater?
Well, first, Google plays in several ways here. Bob's already mentioned we buy a lot of power, we invest in large amounts of renewables, but before I get into that, there's a lot of work just to bring search results to the world, and efficiency plays a big part in what we do as well. So it's not mentioned as often as it probably should be, and if you look at the global climate picture, it's very difficult to solve anything. Every scenario going into the future has dramatic improvements in energy efficiency. So one of the primary things Google has always been doing is making data centers more and more efficient over time. We now get 3.5 times the efficiency out of a data center, 3.5 times the compute power per unit of energy than we did 5 years ago. And those numbers are very dramatic improvements, and will continue to push efficiency, as do a lot of the others in the IT space. So the efficiency of computing and the move to cloud computing is another one that it's a trend where the user can use all Google services, whether it's search, YouTube, Google Documents, and in 1 month, it's the carbon equivalent of driving a car 1 mile per user. So it's very, very efficient to not have servers and everything on site multiple times and repeat it over and over. So there's a lot of efficiency in where the world is headed, and I think that's a big, very important piece I want to encourage everybody to keep thinking about as we move forward before we get back onto the supply side. But we do a lot on the supply and procurement as well. We started probably 10 years ago thinking about there is an inevitable trend. We're a very data-centric company, so as we looked at the data around climate and the data around what was happening, it seemed to us inevitable as we looked at just the science and the data that we were going to have to methodically decarbonize. And so when we came to that conclusion, we started to procure long-term contracts, primarily for wind and now solar. And we've done, just with our recent announcements, we've done about 2 gigawatts of long-term power procurement of zero carbon power or primarily renewable. So, and that's across, we just announced, we do some in Europe, we've done some in Africa. We just announced the largest wind farm in Africa, which was 300 megawatts in Kenya. We're basically investing and buying power on a worldwide basis now across multiple categories. Why do we do this? For one, we have a big focus on decarbonizing our own operations. So the procurement side, as we've invested or as we've procured what's now close to 2 gigawatts of direct power procurement, that brings us closer to our goal of being 100% powered by zero carbon power renewables. So our goal is 100%. We're not there yet. We keep pushing. We also keep growing. So we keep adding more and more renewable power as we grow. On the investment side, we've put $2.5 billion in as Google. But that has also catalyzed a total of about $8 billion of investments into large solar, wind, and other projects. So we think by deploying our capital, we tend to be a little ahead of others sometimes. So we're not, we're a little ahead of some of the financial community. We'll take a little more risk. We have the ability to go in and do some deep engineering and understand risk. And then we did some of the very earliest or the very first solar rooftop portfolios. That's now become more standardized, and that's a good thing. As the returns get lower and and things become more standardized, we might move on to a different category ourselves. So, but we're big fans of the fact that businesses signed on for this. And a while ago, we felt like we were. There weren't very many out there, and to have basically 150 businesses sign on. But the big number that was mentioned earlier is $7 trillion of market cap is a number that people should pay attention to. There's a lot of smart people and a lot of heft and a lot of real thinking behind this, and it's a serious move that I don't see turning around at all. Thank you.
Well, John, thank you so much for that outline and for making us not forget how we can make our own lives more efficient and that technology can help us do that. You outlined that pretty well. Next I'm going to ask Alex Liftman from the Bank of America a question. I know you'll be shocked, but it's going to be about finance. Although everybody mentioned it a little bit here, didn't they?
Yeah.
If you look at the current investments we're making in renewables, notwithstanding Google's great effort, and you look at what the gap is out there, globally even, for the kinds of investment and capital accumulation we need to make to go through some of the transitions we're talking about. I know that this is something that the Bank of America thinks about, and in fact, you guys made a pretty big, not only signed the pledge with the White House, but you also made a pretty big commitment as a financial institution on moving some capital into this direction. So what kind of view do you guys have on that big gap, and also what role can financial institutions play to help move it forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So
Little question.
Just a little, in 2 minutes or less, right? So just to start, first of all, thank you very much for having us, and thank you to all of you for coming. I'm very pleased to be on this esteemed panel, and we were very pleased to be one of the first 13 companies to sign on to the pledge. You talk about this $50 trillion gap between where we are today from an investment perspective cumulatively and where we need to be over the next 20 years. From our perspective, that's a risk and it's an opportunity. And it's frankly one of the reasons we have been so focused on climate change for such a long time. I mean, from a risk perspective, there's a huge risk to not acting quick enough, frankly, to get those investment dollars flowing. There's certainly a human risk, but there's also an economic risk. I mean, as our analysts point out, we're already losing, call it a percentage point of GDP a year due to the effects of climate change. That will steadily increase to maybe 5% over the next decades. That's a huge amount of GDP loss. So that's an enormous risk. And then, of course, for a financial institution, there is significant gain to be had from $50 trillion being invested from the perspective of our ability to be the market maker in that. So we see it from both a risk and an opportunity perspective. We did make a large commitment with the White House pledge. We committed to dedicating of our own capital or catalyzing $125 billion in investments in renewable energy and energy efficiency over the next 10 years. That was really an evolution for us. We were one of the first I mean, way back when, we were one of the first financial institutions to set our own internal greenhouse. I can yell.
It's an energy problem here.
I'll have water.
Have a sip. Mine's out too.
Is yours out also?
Oh.
I can yell.
There it is. Try it now.
Is it back on? So we were one of the first financial institutions to set a greenhouse gas emission reduction goal back in 2004, but we quickly realized that what we do with it, I mean, as a financial institution, our own emissions are not significant. Quickly realized that what we really needed to do was to dedicate our business to addressing climate change. So we were one of the first, actually the first financial institution to set a significant business goal. Back in 2007, we said we'd dedicate $20 billion over a 10-year period, and we met that goal actually in half the time. So we reset a goal in 2012 to dedicate $50 billion, and what came about with the White House pledge is it was really an opportunity for us to rethink, was that goal aggressive enough? And that's when we came back to the table with a $125 billion commitment. And a lot of things had changed in those intervening years. I mean, John, everything John was just talking about on the investment side, we saw certainly Google, but other players coming out very aggressively in this space. But we also saw a lot of market innovation, some of which I'm pretty proud to say we led in creating a green bond market, in bringing individual investors to the table. We've created a whole platform for our individual, trillions of dollars of individual investments to be potentially reallocated to the low carbon space. And we're seeing much more public-private partnership to bring capital to this area. So, I mean, from a finance perspective, I think there's an enormous risk, and it's one of the reasons, probably really was the reason we got into this in the first place over the last decades, really started focusing on climate change because we saw the potential for real risk for our employees, for the communities in which we do business, and for our business activity. But it has definitely evolved over the past decade to be an enormous business opportunity. And it's interesting, we had a discussion about this before we all came up here. I mean, certainly business is going to, our businesses, and I would say certainly the businesses that have signed on to the pledge, and many, many other businesses that are focused in the low carbon space, will continue to act regardless of what comes out of COP. But I would say from our perspective, from a finance perspective, a strong agreement will also help to catalyze more flows. We'll speed up more capital to this space, and we'll scale up more capital to this space. So it's one of the reasons we wanted to be supportive, not just with an aggressive goal of our own, but coming out in support of a strong agreement overall.
Okay, well, thank you. I think you made you made a number of really important points, but the interesting evolution of focusing on risk, and then over time that becomes risk and opportunity. I think that's an important component of how most people are beginning to look at this issue. But you also ended, Alex, appropriately on one of the things that was actually in the pledge, and that is companies are interested in the signals coming from this Conference of the Parties, and that it be a signal that helps catalyze further work. And I think that that's an important component. One of the underlying reasons why it's important that companies make the kinds of commitments that yours have. So I think what we'll do now, Ashley, if I can call you back into duty, is we'll ask for questions from the audience, and Ashley will try to get over to you with a microphone so you can ask them. I want to point out that Rob Diamond from the White House is still here, and if you have a question about the White House, I will turn it over to him.
Perfect. Should we take like 2 or 3? What would you like to do?
You tell me how much time we have.
Let's do 2. Let's do 2.
Let's do two.
Hi, my name is Leah Schleifer. I'm a graduate student from the University of Maryland, and I did my undergraduate thesis on hydraulic fracturing and environmental justice. So the United States, as we all know, has several major shale plays, and there's a lot of opportunity for us to make a lot of money by extracting all of this resource. And while natural gas is a great transitional fuel, it's not renewable and it's not externality free. There's major impacts on the local communities where it's drilled, and there's also substantial methane emissions, which we all know is an even stronger greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. But since it's so profitable and easy for us to get all the natural gas out of the ground, it makes me, as a young person, worried that that's the direction that we're going to settle on now. So how do we provide an impetus for business and for the government to see natural gas not as a final solution, but as a transitional fuel? And how do we guarantee that our striving towards renewable energy doesn't die down because we have this other solution, even though it's an imperfect one?
Okay, well, I'm going to turn to our natural gas experts.
Do you mind if we do one more question real quick?
Okay, just pile, okay.
Well, conveniently, it's on the same topic, but from a different perspective. So I'm Phil DiCola. I was a NASA scientist for about 20 years and worked in Office of Science and Technology Policy as an advisor on climate and Earth observations. And now I'm here at the COP representing the World Meteorological Organization. We're developing an integrated global greenhouse gas information system, which one of our objectives that could become a recommendation ultimately is to look at methane coming from the oil and gas supply chain all the way to the power plants and storage and the whole supply chain. And the reason for it is that the point you just made about everyone understands that depending on the time horizon, methane could be as much as 80 times more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So while what the gentleman said earlier about the value of using natural gas now, it can be all completely washed out if we're leaking, say, from the supply chain, methane to the atmosphere. So it is a great promise to have a bridge to a renewable energy future, but what I wanted to hear, like my colleague over here, I'd like to hear what ideas are on the table for monitoring and measuring and making sure that the supply chain's tight enough so that that bridge isn't one that's going to drop us into the drink.
Well, maybe if I could distill the series of questions into two basic questions, and I think many of us can contribute to the answer. The first part of the question was, what about the methane emissions and the other potential side effects of fracking and extracting the natural gas and oil as well? The second question is, if we become too complacent or reliant on natural gas as this bridge to the future, is it going to cause us to dial back on other potential solutions? So just my own two thoughts on those two, and then I'll, of course, I'm sure everybody else here has a view on it. On the first, I think, you know, these issues have been highlighted. These issues are being looked at. The EPA is very active in looking at these issues. Many of the states are very active in looking at these issues. And I think it's not unlike many things that have gone on in the past. We do live in an era of much more heightened scrutiny. We do live in an era of much more responsiveness on the part of government and much more cooperation between government and business to address these issues. I mean, we are not natural gas producers, we're just the consumer, but what we see is on both sides of the equation, the government responding and looking for responsible regulation that provides market-based solutions, and we look at industry who are taking the initiative. Is it 100%? Obviously not, never is. But we do see momentum in that direction. So I think those problems are being addressed. It will take some time to work them out, but they are being addressed. As to the second part of the equation, if you just look at the diversity of the people up here, so we're going to keep producing the natural gas because the only alternative is to have it from coal in the interim, less carbon emissions, so contributing to the solution. On the other hand, John and others are going to keep working on renewables and other perhaps disruptive technologies. And I don't think they're going to dial back just because natural gas is there. And maybe with that, I'll hand it to John.
Yeah, I think just to pick up on that one piece, if you look at, we always look on this as a portfolio, not just from Google's perspective, but just from the whole system perspective. And right now, natural gas helps integrate, and you can actually add more of certain renewables in different areas because of ramping and regulation, and there are these services that are provided by fast responding plants. So what Thad said earlier is absolutely accurate, that you do need, you can increase the penetration of renewables And the first thing you want to do is you want to have a broad portfolio with as many assets as you can, and as many of them should be zero carbon as possible. And don't forget about nuclear also right now. 20%, 60% of the zero carbon power in the US comes from nuclear. So right now it dwarfs renewables and any source out there, so I think we want to be very careful about losing some of those sources. But over time, we have to be very careful that we have policies that start to drive towards complete decarbonization, which means that first coal is going to disappear, and then eventually, there are ways to do gas with sequestering carbon, which I think has not been explored as much as it probably could or should be, because as you need those that ramping capability, a natural gas plant that sequesters carbon is always viewed as really expensive and out of the money, but when you view renewables plus storage, it starts to get to be a different discussion. So, and last comment is, methane isn't some of the big issues to your point are methane leaking through the distribution system as well, through cities. There's massive leakage that isn't even related to the power plants themselves. It's not from the well to the burner tip, and so we've actually got a project that we're starting inside with our street view cameras, the cars that drive through, and we're starting to look at how to add methane sensing in the distribution system to see that there's a lot of leakage through the distribution system as well.
Yeah, and just one other point. Remember that one of the foundational elements of this COP-21 is verification, so measurement, reporting, and verification. And that's not just CO2. I mean, that's all gases. And that's a huge initiative that I think all of us are really looking forward to. I think many people heard about, in the last few weeks, China underreporting coal by 17%, a huge amount. So verification is a critical element of COP21, and it's something I think all of us are really looking forward to.
The only thing I would add to this is it's critical that we have a smooth transition. And natural gas and a number of fossil fuels play a role in that, but we need to all be focused on making those smaller and smaller injections of fossil fuels to pace together the system and ensure the reliability and affordability that all of us have come to depend on. So what I think the ask I would have of everyone here is keep pushing. We shouldn't accept a fossil fuel state as the end state. It should be something that we're driving towards, a low carbon, low greenhouse gas future. And that is not just on those of us that produce electricity, but we absolutely need the help of those that consume it if we're ever gonna get there. So measurement, critical, long-term targets that actually take into account the value of these assets and how long they're going to be around, so that we can report to our stakeholders and people can hold us accountable. But also that partnership of step up, demand it, work with us. Let's figure out the systemic barriers to increasing the use of renewables, and all tackle those together.
And
Okay, I want to make sure that
and I just
Rob
want to
has-
add, from a policy perspective, the administration and the EPA identify your risk and agree with it completely. And as a point, just in August, we released a whole new set of standards, very ambitious, but we think achievable, to reduce methane emissions, in particular from the oil and gas sector, by 45% from 2012 levels by 2025. So it's a risk inherent in this transition that we're all talking about, one we take very seriously. And the EPA has released, again, a very ambitious set of new standards for the industry to achieve those goals.
Okay, I think our time limit is up.
No, we've got
Okay.
plenty of time
Oh,
for conversation.
well,
Yeah, I was going to say
And
time for more
get
questions.
some more. Well,
Yeah.
before we get another question, I just want to make a quick statement, and that is my board chair is here, Ted Roosevelt. Ted, thank you for coming. Well, one of the key things that came out of this last discussion is the need for an orderly transition, and that's one of the things that we're trying to build here with this revised agreement here at COP21, is to build a durable agreement that over time can continue to be improved in ambition as we can transition forward. And I think whether it's fairness or whether it's a transition that businesses can count on, all of those things can be embodied or can be facilitated by a good agreement. And I think that that's a pretty important component of it. And part of the transition is exactly what we were just talking about. So let's do a couple more questions.
And for those in the back, if you'd like to take a seat, there's plenty of seats in here, and we've still got 15 minutes left for discussion. So come on in so that we can get you the mic as well. Okay, should we take these two?
Hi there, this is Rasmus Polanco from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. So my question is very simple because it's what we're trying to do as well. So how do we get the next 150 companies to sign up to the pledge and maybe the next 1,500?
Well, I could ask Rob to say something since he was very involved in getting the first 150, but I also want to hear from you guys.
Well, how many people in the audience here represent companies that aren't signed up? Raise your hands, because Rob's here. He can go get you. I mean, that's one. You know, to be serious, I mean, we are working with our supply chain. And Rob's been wonderful facilitating a lot of that work. And frankly, we've had some calls. And hopefully a few of them, I think, Rob, have already signed up. I think that's part of it. I mean, I think this is going to be leverage as much as we possibly can, the $7 trillion of market cap that is already signed on, and go bend some arms and twist some arms and encourage all of those companies out there who maybe don't fully understand the opportunity that this presents to come on board. I think that's where we have to do it.
So what I would say is if we can do it, anyone can. NRG is one of the top emitters in the United States by any count, in the top 5 at any given day with 106 million metric tons. And we were able to set long-term goals that are tied to science, 90% reduction by 2050, 50% reduction by 2030, to ensure that we're living within the bounds that the IPCC says is possible. And when you have a footprint like mine, you either have to address it and deal with it, or you probably won't be in business for very long. So I would say everyone should step up and make these commitments. We have a huge opportunity to benefit from the upside of climate action. But as the president said, while we might be the first generation to feel the impacts of climate change, we're actually the last generation to have an opportunity to do anything about it. So now's the moment, and let's all move together.
So I was just going to say, I think, well, 2 points. One, I think we hope by being early signatories to the pledge that we create some competition among our peer groups to do this. I know within financial services there's an enormous amount of very friendly competition between the various different banks, certainly the US banks, but also the global banks. So I think that's one of the things that we really try to drive here. And sometimes, I mean, I feel very lucky from the bank leadership perspective. I have a lot of support from the top of the house, so we are often one of the first, but sometimes we're not. And when our competitors come out and sign on to something, it makes us take a second look and oftentimes sign on too. The second point I'd make is, and this has been such an important effort by the White House, and we're so pleased to be involved, but there are lots of different efforts that have signed on companies as part of COP. There's We Mean Business, there's I don't know, B-Team, there are a myriad of different initiatives that have come on, and so I wouldn't want people to be left with the impression that it's only really the 150 companies that have signed on to the pledge that are supportive of a strong agreement here at the negotiations. There are lots of different efforts underway, and I think that's one of the things that has been so exciting to us, and not just as we've walked the halls, but over the last couple of months as we've prepared for COP, is there's been so much discussion behind the scenes among businesses, between our clients and our suppliers, that I think that just speaks to the environment the administration and other leaders have created, but also just the environment going into these negotiations.
Okay, why don't we get another question? Who's out there with the microphone? There you go.
Thank you very much. Carlos Carpi from the Brazilian delegation. Thank you very much. This has been an absolutely amazing event. As you may know, the Brazilian INDC also has a broad-based coalition that tries to also have businesses, but civil society as well. And I'd love to hear a little bit from the panel, what do you think the role of civil society is in trying to bring these coalitions together, being being at the table, trying to part of the conversation, or you think it's a moment? So about the orderly transition, I'd love to hear more about civil society and the role in these coalitions. Thank you very much.
Okay, and we're just going to take one more for efficiency's sake. Question right here.
Here's my name is Liu Shuang. I'm from Energy Foundation China. And my question actually goes to the lady from Bank of America. It's absolutely exciting to see the massive commitment you have made on renewable energy. And I was wondering, on top of that, whether there are any change on the fundamental operation philosophy of Bank of China as a financial institute. For instance, there's a gentleman from power sector mentioned that the externality or the negative impacts of their operation is tried to be solved under the framework of US EPA. And whether for Bank of China as a financial institute, there are ways you can try to monitorize and internalize those negative impacts in your investment decisions, in particular for those investment in more traditional fossil fuel field. Thanks.
Okay, you guys got that? All right.
So I think the banks, not just Bank of America, but the banks in general, are definitely spending a lot of time thinking about how do you, to your point, actually internalize some of these externalities. And our research teams are spending a lot of time looking at this and giving us advice and counsel, giving our clients, I should say, our investor clients, really good advice about how they should be looking at their investments, and it's certainly something that we take into account when we're looking at lending and investing. I will say for financial institutions, I mean, some of the aspects of this agreement actually will be really important for financial institutions, as are other initiatives like the Financial Stability Board. Many of you may have seen the announcements over the last couple of weeks that they will really be looking at disclosure and how do you account for risk in the financial system. Those types of efforts to help financial institutions better understand how to incorporate those externalities are going to be critically important. I mean, today the reality is most financial institutions, so we don't just, for perspective, we don't have an asset management arm, so we're not making investments ourselves. We do advise our clients, so that's why our research arm is so important in giving our clients, our institutional and our individual investor clients, perspective. But in terms of incorporating it like into a lending facility, most of our loans are short-term, and a lot of these risks are long-term. So that's one of the things that we grapple with as an industry, is how do you take sort of the accounting of longer-term risks and incorporate them into what tend to be shorter-term tenors in our lending and other decisions. So I would say it's an imperfect answer because the state of the industry right now is imperfect, but it's something that a lot of different organizations are looking at, and it's one of the reasons that we, are so supportive of what the FSB and other organizations are looking at. And then, do you want to take a?
Well, yeah, let me address the gentleman from Brazil's question on just civil society and how, as I look at everything we've got to do between now and 2050 or beyond that, this cannot be solved by government alone. It can't be solved by business alone. This is one of the biggest undertakings that the world will ever have attacked. And unless citizens everywhere are thinking about it, are focused on it, and care about it, you could not do it with just business. We're part of it. We can develop new technologies. We can drive costs down. We can make renewables more affordable. We can even invest in nuclear and other, there are lots of technologies that are going to help. But without the political will, which is a lot derived from people caring and being passionate and being educated and voting, then you don't have the political or the business will to move forward. So I think education's a huge component. We need to focus a lot more on climate education. It's unfortunate that so few people, it's very far down the list in a lot of different countries of things that people care about. They're not as focused as they should be on something because it's one of those complicated problems that requires a little bit of work to understand, and it's far out in the future, and it happens slowly. So we all need to be part of educating people in a better way. Certainly, Google's looking at how to get data and information out there in ways that are digestible, where you can get, data goes a long way, but sometimes people, when they hear the word data, their eyes kind of roll. And so we need to think more in terms of pictographs and ways to get information out there that's accessible, that is usable, and that actually motivates people to really think and to understand the problem and then care. And I think until that happens, we're going to be, we'll have two legs of a three-legged stool, and you're not going to solve it with just business and politics and regulation.
Yeah, and I would just say, I think civil society has been leading in this space as well, along with business. Alcoa has some pretty strong interests in Brazil, and we've been working very, very closely with civil society in the Amazon, in building up sustainable development in the Amazon. So really some remarkable involvement with civil society. And just what John said around the whole issue of climate change, I think this is going to drive collaboration models that we haven't seen before, where business and government and civil society will come together in ways that we haven't really seen in the past to drive solutions to lots of different parts of this problem.
One last piece on that, because I think it was an excellent question. Like my colleagues have said, civil society plays a critical role, but I think it's not just in collaborating together, but business and government have been known to put forward solutions that don't always work if they're done in silos. You have to be engaging with everyone across the value chain in order to ensure that the solutions that we move forward with don't have unintended consequences. So I would just say that civil society plays a critical role in saying, well, did you think about it from that perspective? And it challenges us to put together stronger, smarter plans that will help us transition.
Okay. Ashley, are we?
We've got time for one more round of questions. I know we have one there, and so I can take one more here. Okay, so we've got these two. You first.
Sorry, it's going to be two questions. I'm sorry. Rama Sofia Rajdi from the United States Press Agency. Going back to the civil society, there are many climatic skeptical people in the United States. Some of states. Sorry for the tricky questions, but I had to have an answer about that. Virginia and some other states are really climatic skepticals about the climate change. And this is not part of the society, the civil society, but there are, setting up lobbying against the climate change, evidence of all what we're talking about today, about carbon, for example. So what is your position regarding this? The second question is regarding the announcement of yesterday that there are 39 countries and 23 cities, states, and regions from worldwide implementing a new toolkit to put a price on carbon and covering, I think it's about 12% of the GHG global emissions. Are you, as the US, involved in this? Are you on front line, or are you outside this implementation? Thank you.
Okay, and just one more question right here.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Colleen Quinn, and I'm with ChargePoint. ChargePoint manufactures, deploys electric EV charging infrastructure. I'm pleased to say that my CEO, Pat Romano, is here. We're participating in these events. My question, first of all, I want to also comment on the point about collaboration, certainly especially in the transportation area, to actually transform and do the kinds of things we have to do. It's going to really require business, government, et cetera, collaborating together. My question is for the woman from B of A, which is that you mentioned the fact that the longer-term investment strategies may or may not have yet the appetite to really invest in even emerging companies like ours and or projects. But there are places like the New York Green Bank, for example, that are stepping up, and also the Connecticut Green Bank, and California also, through the Treasurer's Office, is doing some things. How closely are you looking at the activities, investments, and I would hopefully the results from those Green Bank type investments, and using those to really inform your investment and your advisory activities?
And it looks like we got one more quick one up here. I got a last minute request, really quickly.
Just real fast.
You guys got all this down, right? Okay.
I hope
Yeah,
people,
there you go.
Each of us are remembering one, right?
I'm actually going to flick this one over to the White House potentially,
Oh,
but
there
I'll
you
ask the
go.
question. So my company works on a technology that captures carbon biologically and converts it to ethanol fuel. And fortunately, this type of biomass was not contemplated in the RFS, so we're not included in ESA. So our commercial units are actually outside of the U.S. because in the U.S., the lack of technology neutrality.
Say what the RFS is for international.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Renewable Fuel Standard. Thank you. Thank you very much. The Renewable Fuel Standard actually puts it as a competitive disadvantage rather than enabling us. So the lack of technology neutrality is a problem, which then leads to heading towards one solution, which leads to unintended consequences. So my question is to all of you, how are we working towards technology neutrality? How are we going to ensure that everybody that can have a seat at the table does?
Go ahead, Rob.
Sure.
You can start.
Yeah, well, the short answer is I'd love to talk in more detail about it after, but you know, the president's position is that this is a whole of technological approach in terms of this transition, and so I think we are, from an administration point of view, certainly not picking favorites, and we are, I think, very conscious that we are on the leading edge of a technological revolution here in terms of clean energy, and to facilitate those advancements in real time and to accelerate those advancements are our focus. It's one of the critical efforts in terms of the financing that the banks have stepped up to do. It's one of the critical announcements we made 2 days ago when the president was here with Prime Minister Modi and President Hollande and Bill Gates around mission innovation to say that we have technologies that exist today, but they may or may not necessarily meet the goals we need going forward. So our focus is on innovation, our focus is on finance, our focus is on making sure that we continue to move this ball forward and have an agreement here that allows us to do that on that ambitious timeline. So on the details of the individual company, I'd love to take it offline with you and learn a little bit more about what exactly you're doing. So.
Okay.
Great.
Go ahead.
So first of all, huge fan of ChargePoint. I have a fob in my purse, and I charge my car on a ChargePoint station every day. I have a C-Max. So love your technology. So in answer to your question, just because I think I may not have been as clear when I answered the previous question, when I was talking more about externalities, I was really talking more on the risk side with fossil fuel and other types of investments. I mean, it's harder for us to incorporate really long-term externalities when we have short-term loans. In terms of what you were talking about in terms of investing in newer technologies, that tenor problem still sometimes is a challenge. We are providing capital to organizations like the New York Green Bank to then have them provide recapital. So I would say that that point I made sort of at the end of my initial remarks about public-private capital, I mean, I wasn't able to sort of really expand on it, but that's going to be critical. Using public capital to then, leveraging public capital to bring in, scale on the private side for investments in your types of technology, for investments in, project finance in emerging economies. I mean, there are all sorts of ways in which public and private financial institutions are going to have to partner to advance technologies. So I would say that that's really what we're looking to do. And there are many instances in which we are able to, just on a business as usual capacity, not just Bank of America, but other institutions able to do things that are longer term. But in the instances when it is more difficult to us for a variety of reasons, we are partnering with public institutions to make that more possible. And then does somebody want to take a civil society question? All right.
I'll take a shot at part A of your question, and that is, what do we do about the skeptics in the state houses in various jurisdictions in the U.S.? And I think, when I think about it, the first thing to do is sort the wheat from the chaff. Who is taking that position because they truly don't believe that the science supports the conclusions that we all agree on, and who is really doing it because it's politically expedient to do it? And I think a lot fall into the former category. And I think the way to approach those folks without sounding too rude about it is the train is leaving the station. And you can do the political grandstanding but you better be preparing behind the scenes, because the timeline under the Clean Power Plan is going to require you to act. So conduct your planning now, conduct it quietly. You don't have to publicly, politically endorse it, but be prepared, because sooner or later, once the courts make their decisions on the Clean Power Plan and hopefully uphold it, as we believe they will, these states are going to have to act. So that's the way we look at it.
I think that the only thing I would add to that is that you're going to find skeptics, especially in the United States. It happens. And we as business are used to making decisions based on the best information possible. And the best information available today is telling us that we must act. So regardless of the debate going on, I think you'll see smart business leaders across the spectrum taking the steps today to ensure that their business is around for the long haul.
Yeah, and remember, $7 trillion of invested capital is represented saying, you know, don't worry about the skeptics. Let's just keep moving forward. Let's do what we can do, what we know we can do, and eventually they will disappear. My sense is that's where we're going. If I kind of integrate the three questions, you know, I think the bottom line is the climate change issue is a very complex issue. And there are going to be hundreds, thousands of solutions that are going to have to come together to solve this issue. You know, you mentioned charge points. You know, think about the administration's CAFE legislation in the US that single-handedly is going to drive a 500 million ton reduction in greenhouse gas emissions on US highways. I mean, that's incredible, really incredible. And those kinds of policy initiatives supported by strong industry innovation and technology advancements. You know, my own company was trying for 20 years to get aluminization into the auto industry. Without CAFE, we probably would still be on the outside clamoring about it. With CAFE, we've been invited in. I think you saw the Ford F-150 that just got released last year, 700 pounds lighter than the 2014 model. So tremendous opportunities for collaboration and advancement, technology, all kinds of opportunities will come together to solve this problem. The average fuel efficiency standard for transportation in automotive.
Are you guys all, well, first, I'm going to wrap up if that's okay. And Ashley, thank you for helping organize down there. Rob, thank you as always. And panel, what a great set of panelists we've had here. Great insights, confidence that, you know, there is some reason to keep looking toward the future. I want to thank all of you, and I enjoy working with all of you. Many of these things we've talked about, we're working on together, whether it's looking at those risks, whether it's looking at the community work in Brazil. It's really exciting. A clean power plan and renewable energy, all very exciting. And to the audience, if you'll indulge me, merci, gracias, obrigado, and xixi. Thank you.